I started forgetting things on purpose. Small things at first, names, dates, where I left my keys. And that's when my children changed. Not slowly, not sadly. Immediately. Because the moment they thought I was slipping, they stopped seeing their mother and started dividing my life like property. They thought I didn't notice, but I noticed everything, and that was the beginning. Before I go any further, if you're listening right now, I'd be grateful if you subscribed, and maybe tell me where you're listening from. Every story I share carries a piece of my real life, and your quiet support means more than you know. I am 71 years old. I still wake up at 5:30 every morning, even when I don't need to. Old habits stay longer than people do. I make my tea the same way I have for 40 years. 2 minutes steeping, 1 spoon of honey, no sugar. My doctor would scold me. I sit by the kitchen window and watch the light climb over the fence. It always hits the same crack in the patio stone. I've meant to fix it. I never do. Some things don't need fixing. My name is Margaret Ellis. I was married for 46 years, widowed for 6. I raised 3 children in this house. 2 sons, 1 daughter. I packed lunches before sunrise, ironed uniforms while the news played softly in the background, waited up past midnight when they were late. I remember once, Daniel came home at 17, drunk, ashamed. He thought I didn't hear him crying in the bathroom. I didn't knock. I didn't lecture. I just slid a glass of water under the door and sat on the hallway floor until he opened it. That's how I parented. Quietly. Steadily. Arthur, my husband, worked construction. His hands were always rough, cracked in winter. When the recession hit in '92, he lost his job. We didn't tell the kids. We just made dinners stretch a little farther, turned the heat down at night, pretended it was cozier that way. I sold my wedding bracelet. They never knew. When Emily wanted piano lessons, I cleaned offices after dark. When Daniel needed braces, I took in sewing. When Michael failed his first semester of college, I sat at this very table until 2 in the morning, reading textbooks I barely understood, just so he wouldn't feel alone. I didn't resent the sacrifice. It felt purposeful. It felt like love in action. Back then, this house was loud, slamming doors, burnt toast. Teenage arguments that felt like the end of the world. Now, it's quiet. Not sad, just still. They all live within 40 minutes. Close enough to visit. Far enough not to. They come on Sundays sometimes. Emily brings store-bought pie and apologizes for being so busy. Daniel checks his phone between bites. Michael asks if I've thought about downsizing. I laugh. I tell them my arthritis is dramatic enough for all of us. But lately, something shifted. They've been more attentive, more observant. Daniel asked if I ever forget appointments. Emily offered to organize my paperwork. Michael suggested we talk about long-term care. They said it gently. Soft voices, concerned eyes. At first, I felt touched. Children worrying about their mother. That's what I told myself. One afternoon, I misplaced my reading glasses. Couldn't find them anywhere. Daniel smiled too quickly. See, Mom? It's starting. Starting. I laughed it off. Said I probably left them in the refrigerator. He didn't laugh. The following Sunday, they arrived together. All 3. That hadn't happened in months. They sat at the dining table Arthur built by hand, their shoulders almost touching. Emily reached for my hand. Too careful. Too rehearsed. Mom, she said softly, we just want to make sure you're safe. Safe from what? Michael cleared his throat. There are memory clinics. Early evaluations are important. Daniel nodded. It's better to act early. Act early. I smiled and sipped my tea. Let them keep talking. They weren't cruel. Not yet. Just organized. They exchanged glances when I repeated a story. One I'd told before. I noticed. I always notice. That night, after they left, I stood in the hallway for a long time. The house felt smaller somehow. Arthur's photo watched me from the mantel. His eyes were steady, calm. I touched the frame. "I'm not confused," I whispered, but something else was clear. They weren't just worried, they were preparing. And I didn't yet understand what for. But that peace was about to end. I didn't know it then, but that silence was the last real calm I would feel for a long time. The first time I heard it, I wasn't meant to. It was a Tuesday afternoon, rain tapping softly against the kitchen window. Daniel thought I was napping. I wasn't. My knees ache more when it rains. Sleep doesn't come easily anymore. I was standing in the hallway when I heard his voice, low, controlled, careful. He was on the phone. "No, we should move quickly. Early stage is best, before it gets worse." A pause. "Yes, power of attorney. All three of us agree." My hand rested against the wall. I didn't breathe. Power of attorney. I had heard that phrase before, usually whispered in hospital rooms, usually when someone was very sick or very gone. He gave a soft laugh. Not cruel, just efficient. "She won't resist. She trusts us." That sentence settled into my chest like cold air. She trusts us. I stepped back quietly. My slippers barely made a sound. When I entered the kitchen, he was flipping through my mail, stacking it neatly. He looked up too quickly. "Mom, I thought you were resting." I smiled. "I forget things, remember?" He chuckled, but his eyes searched my face a little too closely. Later that week, Emily brought brochures, glossy paper, soft colours. "Just in case," she said gently. Communities with gardens, memory care wings, structured routines. She spoke like a nurse, calm, clinical. You'd have activities, social support. I ran my thumb over the smooth paper. "I like my garden," I said. She exchanged a glance with Michael. Quick, subtle, but I saw it. They had already discussed this. The following Sunday, they came again, all smiles, pastries in hand. Daniel placed a folder on the table, casually. "We've drafted something simple," he said. Simple. The folder was thicker than it looked. Michael leaned forward. "Just temporary, until we're sure." "Sure of what?" Emily squeezed my hand. "It's precaution, Mom. We love you. Love doesn't need signatures." I opened the folder. The first page read, "Durable power of attorney, my name." Their names. Transfer of financial authority. Healthcare decisions. Immediate effect. Immediate. My throat tightened, but I didn't show it. I adjusted my glasses slowly. "I thought this was just about memory tests." Daniel smiled. "This is part of protecting you." Protecting. From who? But that wasn't the worst part. Michael flipped to another page. "We've also spoken with a realtor." A realtor. "The market's high right now," he added carefully. "It would be smart to sell while you still can." "While you still can." Emily nodded softly. "You don't need all this space anymore." All this space. This house held 46 years. First steps. First heartbreak. Arthur's final breath. And now it was square footage. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Mom, we're just being realistic." Realistic. I folded the papers carefully, placed them back in the folder. "I'm not confused," I said quietly. They froze. "No one said you were," Emily rushed to respond. But they had. Just not directly. I looked at each of them. Really looked. Not my babies anymore. Not the children who once needed nightlights. 3 adults, calculating risk. My risk. Daniel's voice softened again. "We're doing this before it gets bad." Bad. As if I were already fading. As if I was something that needed managing. My chest didn't feel angry. It felt hollow. I stood slowly, my knees steady despite the tension. "I need time," I said. Daniel sighed. "We don't have much." That was the moment. Not the paperwork, not the realtor. That sentence. We don't have much. Not, you don't, we. They were already counting down. I walked to the sink, turned on the water, let it run over my hands, just to steady them. Behind me, I heard whispers. Low, urgent. She's slipping. See? I turned off the tap, dried my hands carefully. I'll review this, I said. No one argued. They didn't need to. They thought time was on their side. That's when I knew I would not stay silent. I didn't raise my voice. But something inside me went very, very quiet. After they left, the house felt unfamiliar. Same curtains, same ticking clock, but the air had shifted. I carried the folder into the living room and placed it on Arthur's old writing desk. I didn't open it again. Not yet. I sat in his armchair. The one with the worn left armrest. My fingers traced the indentation where his hand used to rest every evening. I'm not confused, I whispered again. But I was shaken. Not because they wanted control, because they assumed they already had it. That night, I didn't turn on the television, didn't open a book. I walked from room to room slowly. The hallway still held faint pencil marks, height measurements from years ago. Daniel at 9, Emily at 12, Michael trying to stand taller than his brothers. I ran my finger across those faded lines. The paint had aged, the memory hadn't. In the kitchen drawer, I found old-school permission slips, field trips, spelling bee forms, dentist reminders. I kept everything. Maybe that was my mistake. Keeping everything. Around midnight I made tea, didn't drink it. The house was silent, too silent. I replayed their voices in my mind. She won't resist. Move quickly, before it gets worse. Worse. Was that how they saw me now? A timeline? A liability? I remembered when Daniel broke his arm at 11. He was terrified of the cast. I slept on the floor beside his bed that entire week, just in case he needed help turning over. I remembered Emily's first heartbreak. She locked herself in her room. I slid little notes under her door. Silly ones, just to make her smile. I remembered Michael failing algebra. The shame in his eyes. I sat beside him at this very table. We learned fractions together. Those children, those fragile, hopeful faces, where did they go? I don't believe people change overnight. I think they shift slowly, tiny degrees at a time. Ambition, fear, the quiet temptation of control. Maybe they convinced themselves this was love, protection. But protection doesn't feel like paperwork prepared in advance. The next morning, I drove to the grocery store. On purpose. I parked straight, walked steady, bought milk, bread, apples. The cashier smiled and asked how my day was. Clear, I said. Clearer than it had been in years. When I returned home, I opened the folder. Read every line carefully. It wasn't temporary. It was immediate authority. Medical decisions, financial transfers, asset liquidation rights, liquidation. Such a neat word for dismantling a life. I folded the papers slowly and placed them back inside. I didn't cry. I folded laundry instead. One sock, one towel. One steady breath at a time. Some nights, I caught myself whispering their names, not in anger, but in disbelief. How had I missed this? Then I corrected myself. No, I hadn't missed it. I had ignored it. There's a difference. The signs were there, the way they asked about my accounts. The way Daniel suggested combining utilities. The way Emily offered to manage investments. I mistook coordination for care. That afternoon, I went into the garage, opened Arthur's old toolbox. Not because I needed tools, because I needed grounding. His hammer still smelled faintly of oil and wood. He used to say, "Measure twice, cut once." I sat on the small stool beside the workbench and closed my eyes. I began to think, very carefully. Not about revenge, about dignity, about timing, about truth. They believed I was slipping, but I wasn't slipping. They were. Slipping into assumption, into entitlement, and if I reacted too quickly, I would prove their narrative right. The confused old mother, emotional, unstable. No, I would not give them that story. I stood slowly, my knees steady. A thought formed quietly. If they believed I was fading, then perhaps I should let them believe it. Just long enough to see who they truly were. Because sometimes the clearest answers appear when you stop correcting people and start listening. If you're still listening, thank you. Stories like this remind me patience isn't weakness, it's quiet strength. I turned off the garage light. The house was still mine. For now, the next Sunday, I forgot my purse. On purpose. We were at Daniel's house for lunch. Emily had made roasted chicken. Michael poured wine I don't drink. Halfway through the meal, I looked around slowly. My purse, I said softly. I can't remember where I left it. Emily's eyes flickered. Just slightly. Daniel reached across the table. It's okay, Mum. Don't stress. I let my fingers tremble. Just a little. Michael leaned back in his chair. And there it was. Relief. Not concern. Relief. That night, I mentioned I couldn't remember if I'd turned the oven off earlier. I had. Daniel insisted on installing safety monitors the next day. I pretended to have early dementia and discovered who my children really were. The sentence repeated quietly in my mind as I watched them coordinate. They didn't argue anymore. They didn't hesitate. They accelerated. 2 days later, Daniel arrived with revised paperwork. More streamlined, more efficient. Just sign here, he said gently. I stared at the signature line. Let the silence stretch. Then I asked, what happens to the house? He cleared his throat. We'll manage it. Manage. Such a tidy word. That evening I made a different phone call. Not to my children, to a lawyer. Her name was Judith Harper, recommended quietly by a woman from church. I drove myself to her office. Parked straight. Walked steady. Judith listened without interrupting. No pity in her eyes, only clarity. She asked one question. Are you cognitively impaired? No. Do you want control of your estate? Yes. She nodded once. Then we proceed carefully. We reviewed options for 2 hours. Revocable trust, updated will, independent medical evaluation. Measure twice, cut once. I scheduled a full cognitive assessment that week. I scored above average for my age. I requested printed copies. 3 originals. Judith drafted new documents. Clear, firm. My estate would now be distributed differently. Portions to charities Arthur cared about. Portions in staggered trust disbursements. No immediate control. No sudden liquidation. I transferred my primary accounts. Removed joint visibility. Quietly. No announcement. At home, I placed the new documents inside Arthur's old metal lockbox. Then I did one more thing. I purchased a small digital recorder, not for theatrics, for clarity. If they were going to speak freely around me, I wanted truth preserved in its own voice. The following Sunday, I forgot Daniel's birthday, on purpose. I called him 2 hours late. Oh, goodness, was that today? There was a pause on the line. Yes, Mom, he said carefully. Later that evening, I heard him in my hallway, on the phone again. She didn't even remember today. A pause. Yes, I think it's progressing. Progressing. I held the recorder steady. My hand did not shake. Over the next month, I allowed small cracks to show. Misplaced names, repeated questions. A blank stare held 1 second too long. They started speaking about me as if I weren't in the room. Michael once said, we should list the house before winter. Emily responded quietly. Better to move her before it's obvious. Before it's obvious. Obvious to who? Neighbours, friends, or to me? Judith advised patience. Do not confront, she said. Let them reveal themselves. And they did. They met twice without telling me. I saw the group messages lighting up their phones. I didn't ask. I listened. The house didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt strategic. I labeled boxes quietly. Donations, personal, archive. I removed the photographs that mattered most. Arthur's hands, the children when they were small. I scheduled a family dinner. My invitation, they sounded almost eager. Daniel asked casually, "Should I bring the paperwork?" "Not necessary," I said softly. That evening I wore my pearl earrings. Arthur loved those. The table was set carefully. Candles lit. Everything looked ordinary. They had no idea the authority they had drafted was already powerless. The stage was set. All I had to do was wait. They arrived right on time. Emily brought flowers. Daniel carried a folder under his arm. Michael held a bottle of wine I don't drink. They kissed my cheek, too gently, too carefully. We sat at the table. Soup first. They watched how I held the spoon. I noticed. Halfway through dinner, Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, we should revisit the paperwork." "Revisit." I folded my napkin slowly, placed it beside my plate. "I've been thinking," I said softly. They leaned forward. "Good. I know you're worried about my memory." Emily reached for my hand. "We just want you safe." "Safe." I nodded once. I went to see a specialist. 3 heads lifted at the same time. "A specialist?" Michael asked. "Yes." I reached for the folder beside my chair. Not theirs, mine. I slid 3 documents across the table. Independent cognitive evaluation. Clear. Above average retention for my age. Daniel's expression shifted first. Not anger, calculation. Emily read the page twice. Michael leaned back, very quiet. "I'm not confused," I said calmly. The room went still. I heard the phone calls. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it again. I heard the hallway conversations. Emily's fingers tightened around her fork. And I heard the realtor appointment. That one landed hardest. Michael stared at the table. I reached into my cardigan pocket and placed the recorder gently in the center. No drama, no raised voice, just truth. I pressed play. Their own words filled the dining room. "She won't resist. Move quickly. Before it gets worse." No one spoke while it played. When it ended, I let the silence sit between us. Sometimes the loudest moment in life is when you say nothing at all. Daniel tried first. "Mom, we were protecting you." I looked at him, really looked. "From what?" He didn't answer. Emily's eyes filled, but she held the tears back. "You were slipping," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "You were." Michael finally spoke. "We thought it was time." "For what?" He had nothing to say. I slid the final document forward. Revised estate plan. Trust established. Property transferred. "You no longer have access," I said evenly. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You did this without telling us?" "Yes." Emily's voice trembled. "You don't trust us?" I folded my hands in my lap. I pretended to have early dementia and discovered who my children really were. The words did not shake. They did. Daniel stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor. "This is ridiculous." "No," I said quietly. "This is measured." Michael rubbed his temples. "We were trying to plan ahead." So was I. Emily finally began to cry, real tears now. "Mom, we love you." I let that sentence settle. Love without respect is management. "I don't doubt you care," I said, "but you were ready to decide my ending without me." Daniel's voice hardened. "So what now?" "Now," I replied softly. "You wait." I stood slowly, my knees steady. This house remains mine. I walked to the front door. opened it calmly, not angrily, not dramatically, just open. Daniel hesitated. Emily followed him. Michael lingered last. He looked back once. I held his gaze. No shouting, no threats, just consequence. When the door closed behind them, the house shifted again. Not smaller, clearer, and in that silence, I finally felt free. Sometimes freedom doesn't arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives with an empty driveway and a steady heartbeat. Respect, once lost, can be reclaimed if you wait for the right moment. It has been almost a year now. The house is quieter, but it isn't lonely. There's a difference. I still wake at 5:30, still steep my tea for exactly 2 minutes, still sit by the same window. The crack in the patio stone is still there. I smile when I see it. Some things don't need fixing. I didn't lose my children that night. They lost their assumption. We speak occasionally, short calls, careful conversations. There is distance now, not hatred, not shouting, just distance. And sometimes distance is honest. I don't pretend anymore. Not about my memory, not about my strength. When I pretended to have early dementia, I wasn't testing their intelligence. I was revealing their priorities. And sometimes that revelation hurts more than betrayal. I don't hate them, I don't wish them harm, but I no longer confuse closeness with trust. Trust lives in small moments, in how someone speaks about you when they think you cannot hear them. Some evenings, I sit in Arthur's chair and remember the first time I heard Daniel say, "She won't resist." I didn't feel rage. I felt awake. Awake to the truth that dignity must be protected, even from those you raised, especially from those you raised. Peace did not come from exposing them. Peace came from protecting myself, from knowing I was not fading, not slipping, not confused, just patient. Maybe justice isn't loud. Maybe it isn't fast. Maybe it's simply being able to sleep at night without fear of being quietly erased. And I do, every night. Because respect, once lost, can be reclaimed if you wait for the right moment. And I did. I waited. And in the end, I chose myself. Would you have done the same if it were you? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, I'd be honored if you subscribed for more.